democracy has flourished for centuries. It's being able to have that discussions and debates and come to that common ground that generates the greatness of what humanity has to offer. There has to be a purpose that feeds our passion. And the policymakers continue to do this status quo, always click behind the wheel. We'll wake up 10 years from now and say, holy crap, what happened?
Okay, excellent. Everyone, welcome back to the Potentia podcast. Today we have Nick Vyas on the podcast with us. Nick is one of my mentors. We've done work together in the past, and he is the founding executive director at the USC Marshall Global Supply Chain Institute. Nick, welcome to the show.
Sounds great to be with you.
You are one of the most well-connected and most update to people in the industry. You are working with so many different parts across supply chain, logistics, bringing students into the new era, and you've had a lot of programs going on. I think to kick everything off, I want to start with a personal question of what was your journey getting into this looking like, just in case people haven't gotten to hear that from you.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because my journey, when you talk about a 360 degrees journey across the circle of life, it literally is the case in my case. My undergraduate industrial systems engineering, I always wanted to really look at the systems and optimization side and understand exactly how does the subsystem systems interlinks and how does the processes work and how do you optimize it. Ultimately, how do you remove the friction to gain the better version of your system output? That led me to, from consulting side into running an operation, which was an incredible turning point in my life. Is the one thing is, as a consultant, you can get to evaluate, you can get to recommend things, but you really don't own the implementation ownership. And I was fortunate enough to take the detour into the world of operation, ended up running global supply chain networks for one of the most iconic corporations, not only in the US, but globally, such as Sears, Toys R Us, Duty Free. And that showed me that, yes, the processes, yes, the systems, and in between components are important, but the people are the most critical asset in your network, in your enterprise. So that gave me sort of an appreciation of the human capital side. And I was blessed to have that opportunity to lead an incredible amount of talented individuals in that journey. And in between though, that part of my journey, I always knew that I wanted to sort of teach. And that led me to, while I was working in corporate America, allowed me to actually be an adjunct professor, where I started to teach my areas of expertise, the global supply chains, the quality management systems, Lean Six Sigma, sort of a concept. And here we are 15 years ago. It took me to have an incredible opportunity to be at the helm of what we are doing today at the University of Southern California, Marshall School of Business, was I was able to have my fingerprints on both from the concept to launch and almost 14th cycle of our Global Supply Chain Excellence Summit, 14th cohort of Masters of Science in Global Supply Chain Management, and being at the helm of the endowed institute known as Randall R. Kendrick Global Supply Chain Institute, where I'm the founding executive director. So, long-winded answer, but that's the journey in a nutshell. That if I were to look back, and I tell this to my students, and if you had asked me then when I was in my 20s to say, would I have actually planned these things out along the way? Answer is absolutely not. It's almost like you're in this cosmic river, you're going to let and flow through series of experiences and build onto it and just enjoy the journey.
I think that's a great outlook. It's just, there's so many things to break down there, but one thing I love is you always bring such a great attitude and energy That's something I've also just noticed about logistics and supply chain in general. It's a lot of good people, and you definitely help cultivate that. I think there are so many things we can jump into, but with you've seen so much, obviously, across your career, your time shepherding change, but we can talk geopolitics, we can talk change management, we can talk people, education. So many different things are going on in the world right now. Now that we're in a time where we're seeing, I remember when I first got into logistics and supply chain was when we first started seeing a lot of push for more digitalization increasingly over the last decade. But now we're in a time where we're seeing a lot of new technologies come in. So I guess from your perspective, can you give me what does a snapshot of the world look like to you right now in terms of the major things that you're paying attention to?
Well, I think we're no longer going into the paradigm shift. I think it's a paradigm break. What do I mean by that? We're going from digital visibility, where we're really focusing on understanding the movements of goods, being able to digitally trace it, control tower, ERP, YMS, WMS, all of the systems that used to trace things along your value chain to almost digital decision making, where they are just incredibly powerful, where you're no longer just collecting and gathering data and look at the history or look at what's happening today. But we are now in position with the agentic AI that we can actually make decisions proactively, make critical what if scenarios using the agents to really come to some of the most sophisticated decision making capabilities that we have never had. And this is probably one of the most exciting frontier of our supply chain world. And I'm really, really excited about it.
I think that there is so much going on. I remember when I was at Boeing, we launched Insight Accelerator where we were using predictive capabilities. And like you said, now we're in the midst of it. We are in agentic AI. We have agents. I guess from who are you talking with and how are they leveraging it? Because you are seeing this on the ground in real time.
Well, so I am really chin deep, if not even eyeball deep into this space, right? We're writing 5 case
Mhm.
studies on this very subject.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating because you realize that typical case studies, I mean, it takes months to collect the data, gather, synthesize, opinionate, and then you're right? This cycle can even diffuse the learning curve to come to about 2, 3 months. In this agentic AI case studies, 2, 3 months, and there's a whole new evolution cycle that's kicked in. The things that you have looked at 3, 4, 5 months ago have changed dramatically. And gaps you may have identified, limitation you may have articulated, they're no longer that new capability that come across. So the evolutionary cycle is so rapid that it's hard to even keep up in it. So what this basically tells you that every iteration of this large language model that we see, they're not just a marginal improvement what we used to see in a previous launch of any software. These are monumental shift in terms of the capability, in terms of the advanced computing, both from the speed standpoint, decision-making standpoint, and truly even very deep analytics capability. So when I see that space, the rate of transformation, and then we see all the entrance of startups, large VC, PE funding coming in, both the pre-seed all the way to the Series C. It is just incredible gravitational force being generated. I think the supply chain professionals, if they don't stay tuned and stay engaged in this space, I mean, I can see they can skip few generations and can realize that you're now behind multiple cycle.
So, I mean, I'm very curious about it because there's so much potential for this technology. I guess, how do you just again what you're seeing because I know that you're connected with a lot of people. How does the VC landscape look? I know that there's some hype around it, but then there's also people that are perhaps getting fatigue. And then the other aspect is we're bringing this technology into the logistics space, which just is very A, complex, and then B, we're handling a lot of data as well as just getting people on board with using these technologies. So I'm wondering what that connect has looked like in terms of the people you're talking to and what you're seeing.
Well, I think, listen, if you look at the historically, right,
Yeah.
every major transformation milestone, there's a combination of things that happen. There is a hype that happened. There's a whole exuberance of how much of this can be promised to the humanity and humankind and how that's going to transform. There's another dimension that pops up about the scare, being fearful about the change or unknown, fear of unknown kicks in. And there is a capital moment, sometime kind of what Fat Chair used to say, irrational exuberant. In the middle of that is somewhat a balanced outcome that occurs in all of these things, right? You think about the gold rush of the West. One can articulate that. Industrial revolution, launch of steamship engines to aviation to internet, World Wide Web. We have gone through this phase. I think what makes me feel in this AI space that this is different. And different in a sense, let me actually say two things that I can articulate in this conversation about why this is different. The one is that we, as a humans, have always been somehow engaged between these nodes of transformation as a shepherd, right? So if you think about the invention of personal computer and a spreadsheet, yes, it actually took a bunch of paper documents we used to write and compile information. Spreadsheet made it really easy, but there was a human connection to that digital node. When you think about robotics and in previous speak, PLCs and all of those things, every one or two nodes there was a human. In agentic AI space, I can almost foresee that maybe I can have tens, 20s, and hundreds of nodes, digital nodes, and I may only need one human shepherd to guide those, to double check, to make sure the final decisions being executed and exceptions being managed. So when you talk about the decision-making capability, having an understanding and articulating and continues to learn mechanism that exist in this large language model, I think that is a fundamentally different domain that we're touching in than all the previous transformational milestones that we can discuss. And that is what differentiates and why I am so excited about it, is that this is unique. We have not seen that, when you think about big data models we used to have in business intelligence solutions, yes, we were getting close to building the predictive capability, but it was still collecting the data, having model runs, and somebody guiding those data models to understand and then make some predictive decisions. This is very different. I mean, your agentic models are now capable of almost self-sustaining and learning and getting better and better, much faster and a consistent rate than that of a human being. So that is what differentiates. And when I believe, if you follow the money, why VCs and the private capital is so much excited about moving the money and resources into this space, both building the physical infrastructure for the AI and also the digital applications that sits on top of it.
So, I mean, again, so much to unpack, but very well said. I mean, this technology can scale in a way that we haven't seen before, which is incredibly impressive. What are the type of conversations that you're having? You brought up the physical infrastructure layer and the build out. Is it varying regionally at all? How does leadership in that space look? And I mean, what is actually going on? Because I hear so much all over the news, and it just varies so much from region to region.
Well, I think we do see the public sentiment on this issue, specifically in the United States, that people love using AI, but they hate data centers, right? I mean, we see this as
It's
a,
funny.
yeah, it's a big, it's the contradictions that
Yeah,
I sometimes really
it is.
puzzles me because, wait, you are so excited about using cloud and the chat GPT and other tools, but the same token, you don't want the structures. Well, guess what? That's what feeds what you really enjoy. So we need to break the dichotomy of that paradox. That being said, is it
Yeah.
a resource, excessive resource consumption through generating these data centers? Absolutely. Does it require enough cooling capability? You bet. Do we find ourselves where this can actually outpace the total energy consumption that of a human species on the world? You bet. The rate and scale by which we're growing, it's likely to be the case, right? So yes, there is some constraint, especially if you're continuing to depend on hydrocarbon as an energy input, you have some legit concerns about it. I think in terms of just physical infrastructure to support this AI boom, right? You can start to think about opportunities that is beyond some of our imaginary capability at this point, which is do we foresee in the near future, decades from now, having data centers in space? That's where the money and conversation is flowing now, right? Because your cooling cost substantially lowers and your electricity cost will be substantially lower because you can build some things in the space that you don't have to physically be constrained in some of the nuclear or the source of energy and solar. So there's some exciting thing in that space, building the physical infrastructure. Unfortunate part of it, that as we grow that, I don't need too many human capital to run a data center. Right? Yes, in the initial construction phase, it's a great opportunity, but it is not something that you can say it'll create jobs for a long period of time. Right? So that's one thing. Then if you move to the physical AI, we've been talking about the digital AI, but just think about the physical AI, where your robotics and humanoids, not only they're given a one task and program, which we traditionally did using PLCs and other programmable logic control devices, where they were trained to do one thing. Imagine now having AI, where they become multifaceted, right? So if they're done with process A, they can shift over to B, and they can jump in, and then dynamically they move where the bottlenecks are. Imagine the line balancing that we used to do, and understand the resource reallocations. All of those things can then be automated using digital AI supporting the physical AI. So now when you combine that in an aggregate, this space now becomes way more fascinating. And so this infrastructure and then its wider application, you can see how this can shape what next 10, 20, 30, 40 years and beyond that's going to look like.
I think it's just incredible. There's so much going on, and we're addressing so many points. I want to switch the angle a little bit. So you have a unique position because you're talking with these companies, you're advising different stakeholders, but then you're also responsible for overseeing education of the next generation, and not even just the next generation, but even current leaders. So I'm wondering, with all of this change, all of these things going on, how do you approach educating A, the next generation, and then B, people already making these decisions? Because you're coming at it from people with different capabilities, different skill sets, and that's a lot to manage. So I would just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Chelsea, I think that's probably the one thing that makes me really excited and nervous at the same time. Right?
Yeah.
In my recent class, very impromptu, I had 6 teams that were working on one of the Lean Six Sigma project, which would have been traditionally done with a bunch of uh, processes that you learn through the body of knowledge, and you're collecting information, gathering data, analyzing it, improving, identifying the gaps, and so forth. Going to very classical quality management body of knowledge. Because what I actually had those 6 teams work on agentic AI framework to say if you were to ingest these data sets from the company and have agent go through each of those key phases and train them, what would they do? How would they actually produce some of the outcome? And guess what? It was phenomenal. The experience. Was it as good as what we would have been done? This was the first iteration, but I think achieving over 90% in the first get-go, I think was an indicator that the students are not being fearful about it. They're adapting this. They're co-piloting with it. So one of the key idea that USC as a university with the Marshall School of Business and certainly at the Institute in my program in global supply chain management, we are early adopter, meaning I don't want the students coming out of it, the next generational leader, to be fearful about it. Embrace it, adopt it. In my view, the jobs in the future is going to be incredibly beautiful for those I call AI plus world. And AI plus world for me is the world in which every other technology that we have adopted in our human species history over the last 10,000 years, it's not the technology itself became the revolutionary. It's how people commercialize and what application they build on top of it, what made an incredible human capital growth. So let me just go a little bit further on that thought.
Oh yeah, no, this is great. I love this. Yeah.
Right. So let's think about electricity. The invention of electricity. Imagine our species prior to that. We rise up at the sunrise and then we call it a day at the sunset. Our production system existed during those hours of operation, in most cases. Well, when we invented the electricity, it's not the invention of electricity changed and created a gigantic commercial opportunity that employed millions and millions of people. It's about the distribution of that, converting that into the utility companies, into getting those things to your house, my house, industrial landscape, and then building other ecosystems around it that we today run the global economy 24/7. So think that and frame that thought into how AI would work with the physical and digital. So when I talk about AI plus, is the analogy I use is looking at the electricity invention and then everything else. Electricity plus is what today the global trade functions on.
It's funny because I remember when I was living in Pasadena, I can't remember if it's by Lloyd Frank Wright or something, but they have I think it's someone else, but they have the Craftsman houses in Pasadena and you can go look, they're beautiful. But if you look at them, you brought up electricity. And when you go inside, you walk into these beautifully designed houses that have perhaps pieces of Art Nouveau and the woodwork, stained glass. But the lights, they use very heavy shading on the lights because they were fearful of the impacts of electricity at the time. So it's just, if we look at the way that technology has been, applied, diffused, and adopted and evolved over time, there was fear towards that first too.
Absolutely, and then rightfully so, right? I mean, this is a new thing.
Yeah, it's
Human species, our DNA is coded with the fear of unknown, right? So we always tend to
yeah.
something that we don't know, we cannot comprehend, makes us sort of unsettled, creates anxiety, the fear. So it's a natural instinct by which we have survived and evolved all these years. Uh, but I think if it is done right, adapted right, so to circle back to your original question, is the students coming out of our program, I want them to embrace it. I want them to excel at it. And I want them to take this as a vehicle or the ecosystems on which they can actually help what those jobs in the future is going to look like, not bury their heads in the sand, hoping that this will go away.
Exactly. I mean, I think this is one thing I love and so much respect about programs like yours at USC is they really prepare the student for the real world with real types of working cases, in some, cases, the opportunity to help on real projects that you connect them with other people. So I think that's brilliant because we can't just ignore it. At the same time, I know that given your position, you have this responsibility to the younger generation, but then you're also serving people already in business, in policy positions. I'm wondering if you think that, is there any, I don't know, I'm just actually curious. Have you seen any misunderstanding, or do you wish that perhaps either policymakers or people in logistics supply chain or technology, is there anywhere where you see a gap where there could be a fixed approach, perhaps, either with, the agents, the infrastructure? It's a large question, but I'm just wondering if anything has stuck out to you.
It's a great question, Charles. And two things comes to mind.
It's a difficult one.
So two things comes to mind. And I think if I can break it down, those two things, one for the industry, which I feel like the industry leaders that I speak with, they're like, if you will, deers in the headlight. They're just shocked. And they don't know, do I get away? Do I move? Do I not move? What are my next steps? That questions exist predominantly in that side. On the policy side, the second thing, which is more scarier, that I think one thing keeps me awake at night is on that second dimension, which is policymakers, like they typically tend to do, they're fondest of gun will. They think
Yeah.
they think that these things will just blow over and it will just be many things that we have dealt in the past. And my concern is we know in our country here, we know the implication of outsourcing of manufacturing in the late 80s into the 90s, right? Left huge amount of well-qualified workers behind on the Rust Belt when the manufacturing was easy to shut the factories and move those factories to overseas. But then policymaker forgot to reskill, redeploy, proactively engage in discussions about how do we actually take this human capital and then reintroduce them into the working society that needs that opportunity. And I have a fear, genuine fear, not just here for us in America, but globally, that unlike the previous transformational event where a lot of the jobs, or majority of the jobs were targeted into blue-collar jobs, so the frontline workers, agentic AI, unfortunately, will actually be more detrimental to the white-collar jobs, what we call the middle-class America. And the policymakers continue to do this status quo, always click behind the wheel. We'll wake up 10 years from now and say, holy crap, what happened? How do we now find the students coming out of the schools and colleges? And how do we really have the strategic objective to create the future for them? So it's a industry, higher education institute, where we are, and the policymaker. This holy trinity needs to cohesively work together to really build some decisive action plans, not in silos, but as a collective force to deal with these things and take advantage of what this technology has to offer, but create better future for our citizens and humanity as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really well put, and it's in line with some of the feelings that I've had. I've been speaking with people in logistics, in policy, in technology, across all the spaces. I've seen, like you, different ways that we have governments approaching these things, either, at the federal level or the state level in the United States. We have Europe doing their own things, often at a country level. And then we have China with its kind of overarching strategy. And I would argue that China tends to set harder objectives. So I see some diffusion there rolling out, but it's also a different structure because you have more of that cooperation between the different parties. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it is interesting to see. Then in the United States, I was just in Washington, D.C. in January, December and January. And like you said, there's just, I think you put it, falling asleep behind the wheel. It made me feel like we were abandoning our leadership because there's no clear vision and there's lots of complaints. Everyone has complaints, like you said, but at the same time, it's good. I think we definitely need to consider these things, but we can't just A, abandon leadership, B, complain about things without offering a solution. And then it's just with this technology, yes, there are risks and there are potential fears, but it does also offer the ability to reimagine how things could be, and maybe how we could upskill and improve things. So I think that that resonated a lot with me because it's been really frustrating to just see from this perspective. I think with that in mind, are you seeing any better engagement between, business policy? How do you go about facilitating that? Because you're connected to a lot of people, but it's a lot to juggle.
So, Chelsea, I think your observation are right on the dot. Um, I think we are not actually cohesively working this as an opportunity space to say, how does the higher education institutions that are intaking these undergraduate students, where the pedagogical framework is 20, 30 years old, and is no longer relevant nor applicable, how do we change and transform that? And I would even propose not only waiting till somebody shows up in your freshman class of undergraduate, but this to start at the middle school, like not earlier, right? Meaning the world that we're going to be living in, we need to have an incredible paradigm break in terms of making sure that we are keeping up with the change curve and diffuse the learning coming as early age as possible. Right? And whatever that case may be, I'm not the expert in early education and what that should look like, but I know we have incredible, talented individuals that they will actually propose some amazing ideas to build kids coming out of that age to adapt what's likely to be when they graduate from middle school, high school into the universities. That's one thing. The second thing you mentioned about China and Europe, uh, I think you've seen my writings. I've often talked about it, that the death
Yeah.
of democracy, in a sense, that our inability to create the constant force of change over a long period of time has diminished. Every 4 years, every 5 years, whatever the year in terms of each of these countries' election cycle is, we go 2 steps forward, or we 1 step forward and 2 steps backward, because next administration comes, gets rid of the 50% or more of what was done, and then say, I want my own name and my own fingerprints and things. So we got to this constant friction rather than going on a continuum of the change. China, which is command and control, has 5-year plan built out over 45 years, 9 cycles, right?
Yeah.
And beyond. So there is a constant sort of long-term strategic plan that gets executed in a very different way. Is it good, bad, or indifference? I'm not going to judge on the model, but when we talk about the pure execution of looking at this, I think can we not adopt some of the best in class practices and sort of integrate that in our democratic framework where it's not about individual recognition, but rather collective, what's good for the country, what's good for our communities, and what's good that moves us forward, not this constant friction. And so I think if we can do sort of create that win-win scenario, then I think the democracy is nothing but an incredible runway to prosper and address not just the agentic AI, but I'm talking about the long-term issues on the horizon, sustainability, environmental issues that we're going to have to deal with, it, social welfare, making sure that nobody falls through the cracks. All of these things can be accomplished in a much greater ways if we just sort of fix and work on some of those basics on the governance side.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like people recognize this. It's definitely something I lay at night and I think about is how can we align perhaps incentives, opportunities for us to connect and create these long-term horizons? Because right now it's quite fragmented, as you said, which is limiting us. And then there's other issues in terms of people coming from different backgrounds and maybe not having the same focus areas or perspectives in terms of what should be done and then how to go about doing it. There's also just a lack of understanding, I think, perhaps in how policy works or how business works. Sometimes there's a disconnect. We're going to jump back into that. But with all these issues, I mean, you just made me think we've been talking about change, reimagining things, and fear. I'm just curious, how do you go about approaching this, even at a human level? Because, yes, we do have these survival instincts and we want to be smart. But as a human, how can we just move through life and adapt to these things, perhaps in a balanced way? I feel like I respect a lot of the things I've seen you done. So I was wondering if you could share with the audience, because I know we've talked a little bit about this before, but I think it's important.
So Chelsea, so dimensions I often don't talk about in open forum, but it's very philosophical, right? As a human species. I mean, if we think about the evolution, we have to understand that both physical and metaphysical forces continues to change around us, right? As you and I talk right now on our podcast, things around us in cosmos is constantly changing. Only thing is constant is change. So we have survived as a human species to deal with a lot of issues over tens of thousands of years, even though our time on this planet Earth is not shorter than other species, and in cases of those who are living extinct. I think we have to understand in the grand scheme of things that the time that we as individuals have on this planet Earth on a time scale of what the cosmos represents, it's not even a speck of sand on the beach, right? Meaning our 80, whatever the average age you're happy to think that we're going to live. Imagine that when you talk about Earth being around for 5.5 billion plus years, right? So rather than getting too concerned about this thing, how do you embrace and take on a journey and be part of it? So my philosophy has always been, ever since I was young, is that don't fight the current, flow with it, right? I mean, we are on this cosmic river. It's not, I mean, yes, you can. I mean, you can swim against the current, but I promise you, you will be exhausted and ultimately you will buckle. So this forces of change, if you don't shift that paradigm to say, this cat is out of the bag. We have never in the human history ever seen $1 trillion valuation of the companies. And now we're talking multi-trillion-dollar valuation. A lot of capital is flowing in. These are the forces the size of a seismic forces. Why try to fight it? Let's embrace it. Let's adopt it. Let's actually sort of understand how you can be very productive within this ecosystem. And how do we actually move forward? And I think as soon as we change the frame of reference, I promise to you, all of a sudden, this world of unknowns and the anxiety gets surrendered into accepting the possibilities and new opportunities, and you become part of the solution. So my personal desire would be that many of my students, the people that I interact with and companies that I speak with and the policymaker I have an opportunity to have conversations with, I had to work from that frame of reference.
I love how you outlined all of it. You made me think of this one single line of poetry I read years ago. It's by Rabindranath Tagore, and the line is, "The stars are not afraid to appear like fireflies," in terms of shining brilliantly, brightly, but without attachment. I'm just like getting goosebumps. But I think that's a brilliant philosophy in terms of how to approach it. And it's a much more empowering way to approach it because, yes, we can acquiesce all of our agency. But this is, one thing that often I see in students is an excitement about the world. And then as you live on, life comes at you, even earlier in life. It can be at any point. But I think coming with that philosophy can help adapt through the change. I think when you're finding people to partner with, I guess, how does that look like for you? How do you connect with people? How do you form partnerships? Because this is something you excel at, and you're quite good at navigating the space of people that are true change makers. I'm just wondering.
Well, again, I think as a child, I was very curious, very inquisitive. I always wanted to know why and how things work the way it does,
Yeah.
right? Without being subjecting myself to any opinion. One thing I was fortunate enough to be raised in a family where I was not restricted to question things. And I think that ability, being a childlike, when you're an adult, giving your senses that opportunity about being inquisitive, being open to possibilities, and being aware of the only thing is constant is change, then all of a sudden it actually creates a different energy field for you. And I tend to attract those that they somewhat have a similar energy field that of mine. So when I see individuals, I'm blessed to say that I have a keen sense of those that resonate with the same frequency, and they see this world as a place where we can flourish and collectively do some good things in a very finite time that we have in this world. Why waste it? So when I started 15 years ago in my journey in our education institution, I was an outsider, right, in terms of my background and stuff. But what a brilliant opportunity that I feel I'm blessed with to create what I created, to be bestowed on those that have gone through my program, over 1,200 plus, and the people, the lives that I have an opportunity to touch and influence. I cherish that rather than feeling sorry for myself that I am in our education system. It often, from the industry perspective, looks like a massive bureaucracy. So it is that sort of an outlook that allows me to connect to the like-minded people. And I am a very optimistic individual to begin with, and I feel the world has every country I travel to, every culture I interact with. Somehow I find the goodness in them. I not because I force myself, but I genuinely believe that most of us don't wake up early morning thinking that I'm going to go out and screw somebody.
Yeah.
So if we understand and attract that energy and collectively have something purposeful that serves beyond just us as an individual, you'll find the right people that you're going to entangle with in your world.
Yeah. I think that's similar to my experience. I find that that's how things tend to always work out, is you attract certain things by what you are. I think with that in mind, just pivoting back to the other less metaphysical sides of things, when what are some things that you see really exciting people right now? Because we have all this talk about fear, but I also want to focus on what are some of the exciting things that you've heard about going on or are involved in.
I think what excites me the most, again, the reason I'm optimistic and I'm so excited about the space that I just talked about is not because of technology itself, agentic AI, but its ability to remove the friction out of our global supply chain network. Today, 40%, 40, in aggregate in our supply chain networks globally is waste. It's friction. We don't have a problem of resources. We produce abundance of food. But imagine 40% of the food from the farm to the table is spoiled because we don't have a cold chain. We don't have an ability to move that from the farm to the community that is in need for that. We have struggled with this opportunity. So imagine if you think about a $30+ trillion of industry, global trade, and if I take that supply chain opportunity using these technologies and remove this 30, 40, 50% of the waste out of it, we should not at this time in our human history, somebody dying from hunger, somebody dying from the diseases that can be prevented, somebody dying from things that we see that's easily curable because we now have the resources. So I feel that if we find opportunity like that, and not only the good things from the capital side, so making profit and building the new things and creating exciting things, but solving the problem in biosciences, human genome. So when you start to think about this and outside of just physical moments and digital moments and financial moments and goods and trade services, I'm excited that if we focus on that, hopefully as a human species, we can collectively build something beautiful for the future generation.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard just really impressive applications of this technology across cancer, obviously supply chain, as we discussed. There are so many capabilities, biotech, so forth, so on. Before we move on to the next question I have, I realized we're both part of the logistics and understand, but I was wondering if for listeners, you can just maybe give me 2 or 3 examples of what you mean by friction, because I realize maybe some people might not be familiar with that, what that looks like for logistics supply chain or even application of this tech.
Yeah. So when we think of friction, the reason I sort of use this quite often, the terminology, is that imagine the light, the speed of light, right? And it travels in a vacuum, which is what we capture as that nothing exceeds the speed of light, at least until today's in our world of physics, we would know that, right? It actually basically means that there is no disturbance in an environment that either reflects or stops the light to go at the constant speed. When we translate that thinking into the physical supply chain, so the digital supply chain, imagine that our intention is to design something produce in one part of the world and then consume another parts of the world. And imagine if all the resources were in that vacuum chamber were executed without any friction, we consume 40% less resources, right? Meaning inputs, energy, all of those things that runs and hums industrial production systems, to the moments, to the goods coming into as a consumer, and then reverse logistics. So in order to create this circular economy where we can replenish the resources, we can utilize and reutilize things in a very conscious way. If we get rid of that friction, which is what I call friction, which is if we get rid of the waste, get rid of the silo, and silo could be that I have information, but I don't want to share with Chelsea. So Chelsea has to jump through hoops and use a bunch of different ways to circumvent my inability to provide her the right information. That would be the friction. Goods moving from one to the second does not think about how the second node can utilize efficiently and move it to the third node. So they have to do a bunch of steps before they move into the third. That's a friction. So think of friction as a waste and non-value add activities that we consider that takes much longer to move things rather than on time. So when I talk about this thing in terms of we have enough resources today that every citizen of this planet Earth can be fed, can be nurtured with the proper immunization, running water, drinking water. I meant that if we manage the resources frugally and eliminate the waste in our value chain, we're capable of doing much later things, much greater things. The past problem was the data wasn't moving as fast. It was caught up in the silos. Well, now we have capabilities to do things with this new phenomena, the agentic AI as we talked about, and hopefully we can start to adopt and learn. And I'm saying, hey, we will never get to 0% waste. We'll never be able to remove the friction completely. But I bet if we, from the policy side, industry side, our education side, and individual accountability, if we combine those forces together with a singular focus, I think we can make a huge dent. Maybe that's 20, 30, 40, 50%, whatever that is. Imagine how much can we then take care of those resource-deprived communities and provide them an opportunity that we are blessed to have in our lives.
Yeah, I mean, there's just, I mean, so many different facets to us that talk about, but I mean, I remember even from when I was young, I was born, before the advent of the internet and then everything started booming. I remember having to go to stores to buy clothes or whatever you needed. Now you can just order it online. But like you said, this introduces the issues of waste and then wanting to build a circular economy when we're considering reverse logistics and what happens with that. How do we support it efficiently? I've seen some interesting applications where, say, we have farmers selling produce and it's not beautiful produce. We can see this physical produce actually then be shipped to less than fortunate communities rather than being simply wasted. So there's some very interesting ways that we can do that. With that in mind, I think I get frustrated sometimes because I do think people have good intent, but I do think sometimes, there is the grind of daily living in terms of, you have to go from point A to B, you have to get your things done, so forth, so on. And perhaps we have competing priorities or just you might be tired. But with that, we have business, policy, and then institutions like higher education. And I think one of the beautiful things is even though it might get a rep, like you said, for being just pure bureaucracy, it does have somewhat of the beauty to offer a quote unquote non-biased perspective, or at least a connective point for these different people. I'm wondering, in the conversations that you're having, do you find that are most of the issues simply caused by maybe business competition, lack of clear policy? Are geopolitics an issue? I mean, there's a lot we can talk about, but hopefully we will get to the point where we can see more collaboration. I guess, where do you see kind of a sticking point right now?
Yeah, there is a lot to unpack, right?
It's
So,
a
a
lot.
lot
It's
to
a lot.
unpack. So, let's start with the last point first, the geopolitics. So,
Mhm.
I have spoke about this issue and in my books, the opening chapters, I've always written about the history of trade going back to millennia.
Yeah.
And nothing has changed since then, and nothing will change, even with all these optimistic outlooks that I just highlighted in terms of what the technology will enable us to do. Human species, as we think that we're the most intelligent and evolved species on this planet Earth, I feel when it comes to territorial and uh, geopolitical boundaries, we're still have a deep animal instinct. We want something we don't have. We want something that we should take from somebody to just have more. And this is an ongoing battle, right? Yes, if you think about post-Second World War, we actually ran one of the most peaceful global trade 3.5 decades and built this today's economic engine. But you look at it, all the geopolitics disturbances and the data points on our horizon, it's clearly evident that we still have those animal instinct about stretching our boundaries, thinking me versus them, fighting for resources rather than collaborating, competing for things, and saying, I can only be good if I make you look bad, rather than creating a win-win mindset that we talked about. So I don't, I mean, I have a lot of faith in humanity that eventually somebody will figure out that, hey, on this planet Earth, when those natural forces may make us disappear, they're not going to subject you and I differently. Those forces, we all succumbed to the same fate, right? Irrespective of our gender, our race, our religion, our nationality, and our backgrounds. So once that level of consciousness comes in, hopefully someday it will be on these things. And I think we tend to do that when we see the greater threat of something big happening that is phenomenal, that only way humanity can solve is all of us to come together, right? Then I think we'll find it. Imagine like if asteroids were to hit planet Earth in 15 years, guess what? All the nationalities will work together to figure out how to solve that problem because guess what? It ultimately could be detrimental to the entire species, and we'll figure out what that force is. But until that point, we can't continue to create these territorial battles. So that's a geopolitics 101 in my view. So that being said, how do we then live within that? And I think from the society standpoint, we teach our students about the global supply chain management in international settings. Important piece that you have to understand the culturally how different we are. How does the network works in different parts of the world and it gets connected? Both the government, how government plays the role, and we know we've seen the tariffs and the implications on the global trade and so forth. So, right, so that's something we can do that individually. I know you're well traveled, so am I. I would challenge our listeners and parents to say the best thing you can do for your kids or for yourself is to take them outside of their familiar environment and expose them to the humanity in different places, different level, different cultures, different food habits, different music. All of a sudden, it'll open up not only your mind, but your souls, which is so important for us to cultivate that perspective. So that's a second point to that whole geopolitical thing that I wanted to touch on it. Um, And I know your previous question, so if you can repeat that, because I got onto this journey on the geopolitics.
No, it's great. I mean, I think, I mean, the international perspective is clear, but the other point was I just feel like there is right now a disconnect between the policy and perhaps business environments. And I would just hope that we could find some sort. We mentioned briefly, and we don't need to solve it on this podcast. If any of our listeners have ideas, they're more than welcome to share. But what could that collaboration or what could incentives for that look like, or just removing biases, in your opinion, avenues for that?
Yeah, great question, Charles. It's again one of the deep questions, right? I mean, more than
Yeah.
academic and analytical perspective, I think there'll be a philosophical perspective that I would share. That would be a little bit more appropriate. I think that would be that there has to be a purpose that feeds our passion. Lack of that is purely a passion that's self-interest in most cases. So let me qualify what I mean by that. If I get up every morning and until I actually go to bed, my purpose, what drives my passion, running the institute, running the program, taking care of my students, my stakeholders, and it's not just a commercial. In academia, you don't really get engaged and put this level of energy for that reason. So there has to be that. So let's switch that angle to policymaker. We have become so divisive. And this is true across the Western democracies and democracy at large, that we have now shifted in which if I am right, therefore one has to be wrong. The discussions and debate by which we used to come to terms with various issues, draw the common ground, in which is where the democracy has flourished for centuries. And I think will flourish for a long time. It's being able to have that discussions and debates and come to that common ground that generates the greatness of what humanity has to offer. My concern is from the policymaker with incredible capital flow that now we're looking at it. Not a millionaire is still a big deal. Billionaire used to be a very big deal. But now we're starting to talk about trillionaires, where this gap of haves and have not concerns me for the being is great revolutions, if you follow the history, is when the disparity between the haves and haves not have led to some massive transformation bottom up. I worry about that. Right. From the industry side, the same thing to the leadership. Profit is always your primary objective to optimize. And we spoke about this even during the COVID. When I first wrote the decouplings of supply chain was not because that we were anti-something, but it was because that you simply cannot put all your eggs in the one basket. Right? So the leadership in the industry has to also think about properties of one thing. But if you remove the people part of that equation from your corporate mantra, or you keep it on your mission and vision statement and post it on your corporate walls, but not practice, it's detrimental at some point to not only your employee, but the community in which you reside and community that you serve. Right? So the greed cannot be greater than the good. And so that's the second. And I would challenge the same thing, higher education institution, that you simply cannot continue to teach pedagogical framework from the past decade when the world is shifting and moving in a completely different frontier. You can't be teaching IBM mainframe case studies when things are being built at the skill in which student deserves to learn something new. So I think, how do we have each of these big silos sort of a reframe and understand its role and responsibility, not just of physical dimensions, but also a spiritual dimension in which something is greater to serve than in itself. And I think if we can align with that framework, and again, this is much more philosophical framework than I feel that I
Yeah.
shared, I think we can find ourselves that this world is a beautiful place for us to live until we find something else beautiful than our planet Earth.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that 100% because I mean, that's something that I've seen. I mean, I've been partially heartened by what I've seen by business and how they serve communities and ways they go about that. I'm not going to detract from that. With the same heart that perhaps, people going into teaching have or people in policy. I do believe that many of us come to the world from a good place. Like you said, we don't wake up every morning wishing ill potentially on people. But it has to be the center of things. And I'm seeing that lack of political will or purpose. And I referred to that as vision before, but it really comes down to purpose. And essentially, if you can create an organization around that, of course, understanding the other competing incentives that you have, whether those be revenue or the bottom line for business, whatever metrics we have in policy or education, it is an attractive force. I just fear that we're losing it. And it can be easy to forget because life can be a bit tiring. But that's why, it's important for us to be having these conversations. And perhaps it's not the most formal, but I do think it plays a very important role in purpose and meaning that we all have as humans. I guess we are coming up. I'd want to respect your time, but two questions before I let you go. One, is there anything that you've read either now or in the past, or some type of art, film, anything that deeply inspires you or that you would recommend someone else to, watch or read? And then the last thing is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share?
Oh man! So Chelsea, in terms of the reading, my world has gotten
Yeah.
so involved with all the work that I'm doing within
Yeah.
research in
You are
supply
busy.
chain
You're
and global trade
everywhere.
and agentic AI.
Yeah.
So my reading has been
Hmm.
nothing but in my space, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
just
Yep.
recently, last weekend, I was actually at Caltech on this time travel,
Mm.
uh, sort of a time traveler event that was organized by Caltech. And,
Oh,
it's,
fun.
I always find if you ever want to get humbled and something that can bring you down to planet Earth when you think that you're flying high, is to think something at the cosmic level. So that interactions for 4 hours when I'm talking to quantum physicists and astrophysicists and their passion and things that outside of our Milky Ways and how,
It's
right? I mean,
huge.
when that scope gets stretched,
Yeah.
and then I come back and I said, I'm struggling to come up with the case study for fast retail, right? Or removing friction from this or that, or the genetic AI application. So it's sort of a humbling, and I think one needs that dosage once so often to ground oneself to feel that hey, this is such a beautiful time, the finite time that we have here. Cherish, question things, learn things, adapt things, and get out of this beautiful journey. So that's one thing that I feel that I'm doing more, but that has taken away similarly from my reading on other areas of interest, which I'm hoping at some point that I need to divulge myself when things started to become stable in my world. And
There's seasons for
that,
life.
that,
Yeah. You're busy.
indeed, indeed. But in terms of what you haven't asked, I think we had an incredible discussions. You and I, we're now I know when we talk about the entanglement, it's been a long time that you and I worked together, talked together
Yeah.
about journeys and different issues and different things. You've been very passionate. You're well traveled and incredibly brilliant in how you represent your thoughts and your interest, and continue that. And I think only in summary, what I would say that we all have an option to actually live gloom and doom, or we have an option to say, in spite of that, I choose to live blank, blank, blank. Peace, love, and an incredible harmony. That's just shifting that frame of reference from here to there. Nothing else has to change. Physical world doesn't have to change. People around you doesn't have to change. But you just shifting it, I think will probably change. So I think what I would encourage that I try to practice is that I am in charge personally and professionally to use my capability to change the frame of reference that makes me holistic in terms of believing in people, trusting the human species, and finding the good in everyone, in spite of the noise and the friction and geopolitics and things that we hear and digest and consume. And our world today it's a rabbit hole. If you click on something things and then 2 or 3 more clicks, and guess what? It will take you down that rabbit hole before you realize that you can't get out of it. Same thing with the positive things. If you consume positive bytes and the data sets, you will continue to reinforce that. So that's my role that I tend to continue to find. So the algorithm doesn't fool me, make me a pessimistic or a depressive about the humanity. Rather, it continues to indulge me with good things and being realistic about it. So that's my sort of both the philosophical and personal views.
I think that's brilliant. I mean, it's almost like a particle observed acts differently when you observe it versus not. So that brings it down to the individual level of empowerment. And in some ways, like you said, life can act like an algorithm in terms of what you choose to see. But I think that's a really great note for our listeners to end on. I just want to thank you for sharing all of your insights and wisdom as always, Nick. Really love having you on the podcast. I'll make sure to drop your handle and your work so that people can follow along for more. And as always, please feel free to stay connected. Always a pleasure having you.
Chelsea, it was a pleasure talking to you. Good to see you, and all the best of luck.
Excellent. Talk more soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
6 seconds, it'll wake King Batch. Everybody want quick cash and they wanna live fast, quick mad, but the shit don't last. Everybody wanna get high and they wanna get fly, just code for the shit we don't have. Everybody wanna be liked and they wanna seem right deep down, so we all wear masks. Everybody want bright lights and they want loud nights and shine on a real dark path.